good afternoon, everybody, and I want to say thank you very much, first of all, for welcoming us to the heart of Maryhill. And I also want to welcome you to the 58th We ALBA book event, including everyone who is watching on Independence live stream. And I want to say welcome to you all and thank you very much for participating. And thank you also, Independence Live, Gary and Stuart, for producing this for all of us. I want to begin by introducing Nick, who's the Membership Secretary of the Wynford Association. And I probably should have introduced myself. My name is McKernan. I'm the convener of Glasgow ALBA, Local ALBA Campaign Unit. And in a few minutes, I'm going to look forward to introducing the most important people here. I want to let you know that we're going to be joined by Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh, who's the chair of the ALBA party, and also Mr. Salmond, who is the former First Minister of Scotland, who is leader of ALBA party, and my genuine hope he's going to be the leader of Scotland into independence and a much better future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Well, welcome to Maryhill Hub and to the 59th meeting of the We ALBA book tour around Scotland. Now, this is a very special meeting because, as usual, we're going to talk about independence for Scotland and how to get it, but we're also going to talk about independence for Maryhill and who should be taking the decisions on housing in Maryhill. Should it be the council or the housing association or even the government, or should it be the people of Maryhill?
Our rousing welcome, no doubt, from Catherine, but hopefully she has introduced us. As Alex says, this is our 59th We ALBA book event. We've been doing these events around the country for the past year now, and we are joined today by Independence Live, and I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all of you who are watching online, courtesy of Independence Live. I want to take this opportunity to thank Independence Live for their commitment to the cause, for the fact that they've been at every possible event that we've ever done and covered us, and in particular, please join me in thanking Independence Live for the amazing, fantastic, wonderful coverage of Winnie Ewing's memorial service at Inverness Cathedral last week. Now we are here, of course, to talk about independence and the case for independence, but there is a burning local issue that I know you all wish to discuss, and Alex will no doubt allude in his remarks to the various press interviews he's given on this very subject. So you've not read them, you're hopefully very pleased with what he has to say about Wynford. But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce a man who knows an awful lot about it, Nick Durie.
Hi everyone. So I normally do speeches extempore, but I've thought a lot about this one because there's quite a lot to encompass. But I want to start with the story of how I got involved with housing and tenant activism, and I'll keep it brief. But I was homeless when I was 19 after I lost my job. I'd been working in a chip shop and we just ran out of money. We were paying for a bed sit week to week, me and my partner at the time. And we spent 2 weeks in a hostel, which really wasn't very nice, but we were glad of it. And then we moved to Cedar Court, which is just down the road, down Maryhill Road, Glasgow Road. Many of you will know it. But when I moved there, I found that the landlord, the new landlord, the Glasgow Housing Association, was running the scheme down in order to demolish it. So we spent 5-6 years defeating them. But that was how I cut my teeth in housing politics. And, you know, since that time, we have developed an acute crisis. We all know about the cost of living going up, but, you know, when you look at housing and homelessness, it's never been worse since the advent of devolution. There are now 3,000 children in temporary accommodation, like where I was staying. You know, there are over 500 people since the COVID crisis have died in temporary accommodation, unable to access housing like I did. And when I moved to the Wynford to have my family grow up here, you know, my son was born here. The reason I moved here was that the GHA was not the landlord, because I'd previously been chased out of my home a second time by the Glasgow Housing Association. So this is the third time that the Glasgow Housing Association, now rebranded the Wheatley Group, has come from my community. And, you know, that's smart. But obviously, it is a huge crisis. And, you know, as I said, we had 14 dead, unable to access tenancies in temporary accommodation just in 1 week. So things are getting worse. This past week, there's been days where if you were homeless and you went to the authorities in Glasgow to seek a temporary accommodation, you couldn't get any. There's none. And we know that the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, hardly a campaigning body, this is not some, you know, firebrand radicals, these are bosses of council housing, say that there is a massive crisis. There's 243,000 people on social housing waiting lists. You know, every one of those is a story like mine, you know, waiting to try and access housing. And we know that this same body of radicals, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers, say that we need 100,000 public homes. And, you know, we're in the situation in Wynford where the Glasgow Housing Association, now the Wheatley Group, has said that they need to pull down our 600 social homes, and they need to do that for the environment, because if they are unable to, you know, uprate these to an A on an EPC certificate, if they are unable to make them carbon ready for the future, then they need to be pulled down. But this is a complete nonsense, because if we adopted the same approach across the country, it would take 2,500 years to meet our climate change targets if we were to rebuild and demolish. So if we want to move forward and meet our climate change aspirations, it's a very good idea, we're going to need to retrofit. And, you know, there's some papers over there that the Wynford Residents' Union have provided in praise of sturdy buildings, brought to you by a number of celebrated architects and Narrow Associates, the structural engineers, who say that that's very possible. And, in fact, cheaper than pulling them down and starting again. But this cuts to the nub of the problem, because, yes, we need 100,000 new public homes you know, to meet this demand. And that's something that we in the ALBA party have put forward in our first manifesto, shake things up. But also there's this question of how we go about retrofitting to meet the future demands, climate change and so on. Because if we leave it up to the companies, like the Wheatley Group, and Wheatley Group really is now a big company, they look at things in terms of their balance sheet. And that's what they look at this area for. They see an area that's close to the West End, close to a strip of water, near Kelvin Dale, high land values, high amenity values, and they say, well, why don't we cash in? And then, of course, the council, chasing finance as well, is looking at this facility and going, why don't we cash in too? And then they're in cahoots. So when you look at the Scottish Government's plans for how we retrofit homes, they say we need 1.8 billion over 5 years to retrofit. Well, you know, if you look at Commonweal's prospectus, you know, our common home, where they talk about the Green New Deal, they say that we need a national housing company to deliver that, to deliver the retrofit. And that's what we're calling for too. So in the ALBA party, we're going to be putting forward a number of proposals on this. And I'll kind of shut up now, but you know, this is the situation. If we leave it up to the companies, if we leave it, you know, outsource all of the decision-making to these companies, then we just get more tragedies. So that's not the way forward. Thank you.
circumstances, and I should just say how this event will run. We've obviously heard from Nick, we're about to hear from Mr. Salmond, and then after that, you'll have the opportunity to raise your hand and I'll call you and you can ask your questions on any issue, not least the issue of housing. As I said, this is our 59th ALBA book meeting, and it's actually really inspiring to see so many local people here at this event, because this is what it's all about, how with independence we can make life for our communities better, and indeed, to quote a phrase that I've heard Alex use of late, how we get the adults back in the room to deal with issues that are really important. Because it certainly seems to have been the case over the past number of years, there are people in positions of power and importance that fundamentally do not understand what is happening to people in communities across Scotland, and that must change. And speaking of change, it's a pleasure and privilege, as always, to introduce a man who brought great change to Scotland, great hope to Scotland, passion to Scotland, a belief that we could do and can do and still will do things for ourselves if we're given the opportunity to vote for independence and grasp that future in our very hands. Not only did he deliver for an independence referendum, but he also delivered for Scotland many projects, many opportunities, many initiatives that make the lives of people in Scotland so much better. And he is indeed very sorely missed as First Minister of Scotland. But please join me in welcoming to the Maryhill Hub the former First Minister of Scotland and leader of the ALBA Party, Alex Salmond.
Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here in the Maryhill Hub. And as I was coming in a few minutes ago, a gentleman was kind enough to stop me, and he said, you know, he says, I compare you to two other politicians, John McLean and James Connolly. And I thought, well, that's high praise indeed, but I couldn't help thinking that Connolly was shot in a chair, and John McLean went to Peterhead Prison and died of TB. So I'm just going to assure you that I'm hale and hearty at the present moment. But there's a serious point, isn't there? 100 years ago exactly, John McLean died, and his funeral was the greatest public funeral for a political figure that this city of Glasgow has ever seen, 100 years ago. 7 years later, there was another public funeral with the second biggest show of affection for a political figure in this city, and that was the funeral of John Wheatley. So one of the things I'm going to say today, after reading the documentation that Nick has provided me with, that the John Wheatley Group should immediately change their name. Because John Wheatley, the great John Wheatley, the socialist pioneer, the housing pioneer, would be burling in his grave in Derby Cemetery if he knew what was going on in his name. John Wheatley came from Ireland. He had a distinguished career as a publisher and as a city councillor. He was 7 years in the House of Commons, 7 years. And some people who've been there for, let's say, 8 years should perhaps reflect on that in terms of what Wheatley was able to achieve for Scotland before his untimely death in 1930. He was the pioneer of social housing. As Minister of Health in the brief first Labour government, 1923-24, he passed the Housing Act, which enabled the succession of social housing acts that followed right through for the next 45 years. I grew up in one of the Wheatley Housing Act houses in Linlithgow, a house, incidentally, which will be standing for hundreds of years after some of the creations that are going up just now for vast prices. So, because the point about the Housing Act that Wheatley instigated and went forward was it was quality social housing. It wasn't cheap housing, it was quality social housing for the people. And the idea that you should spend tens of millions of pounds in grant funding to demolish 600 socially rented homes in this area, in the high-rise, instead of spending an equivalent amount to refurbish and repurpose them and bring them up to full standard, is an abomination. But there's a second thing. why Wheatley would decry the activities of the Wheatley Group, formerly the Glasgow Housing Association. Right through his political career, John Wheatley believed in workers' participation, in the enabling of people to make decisions affecting their own lives. That was his whole ethos as a Christian socialist. That's what he stood for as a member of the Independent Labour Party, whose leader was John Maxton, who said going to London in the 1920s they could achieve in 5 years more in a Scottish Parliament than in 50 years of toil and disappointment in the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. So Wheatley believed in public democratic participation. So the idea that the Wheatley Group or the Council or the Scottish Government or whoever should ignore the Wynford residents when they make a legitimate demand is an abomination to the name of John Wheatley. You know, people think there's various ways to run housing schemes the length and breadth of the country. And you can have housing in a whole variety of ways. And I've looked at the designs which are meant to be perfect to make housing socially acceptable. You have your own front door, your back garden, your front garden, or in cul-de-sacs so folk who can't use them as drive-throughs. And I've looked at all these designs. And of course, design's really important. But you know the one thing that makes a community work? It's not the houses, it's the people. It's the community, it's what people think of their area, think of their community. And that's why places like this hub, I had a wee deco at one of the walls outside, all the things that are on. I was thinking to myself, I'll probably be back next week to take advantage of some of these meetings. It's what are the activities and the collective engagement of a community. That's what makes a community. So the idea when you've got that collective engagement, when you've got the sort of quality of work that's been done by Nick and his colleagues in terms of providing alternatives to demolition, that you should sweep that aside and say it doesn't matter, is quite wrong. So I'm saying today that ALBA oppose the proposals to demolish the 4 blocks, oppose the proposals to destroy 600 homes which can be repurposed and made better, but repurposed and saved, and oppose the idea you can sweep community objections aside. And if the Wheatley Group are so confident that they have the public support which they claim, they say it's overwhelming support for their proposals, then why don't we place 2 proposals side by side? The proposals for demolition with the public funding that's going to back them, with the proposals for refurbishment with the same amount of public funding. And let the people in this community in Wynford decide which is the way forward. Because the suspicions that are evident that the agenda of the council, the agenda of the company, the agenda of the group is to cash in not on the houses, not on the community, but on the area, on the location. Location, location, location. And the value which is here with a quite different type of housing for a quite different market of people. We've done 59 of these We ALBA Book meetings. And they've been everywhere. We've been to Skye, we've been to the Borders, we've been to the northeast of Scotland, we've been to every city in the country, in many communities. Great meetings. But the one thread that connects we've even been to Edinburgh. It was only fair. But the one thread that connects all of these meetings together is about the issue of self-determination. About self-determination for the country, and self-determination has to be self-determination for communities within the country. The issue we're facing as a country just now is how do you go through a democratic roadblock? There's a roadblock to Scottish aspirations. Westminster got the fright of their lives in 2014. They were absolutely shitting themselves as the run-up to, I forgot I was on Independence Live. They were feeling very uncomfortable, was David Cameron in the run-up to the 2014 referendum. He was phoning everybody. Reverse charges. Round the world. He phoned President Putin. He did. To ask him to intervene against Scottish independence. He's got a flea in his ear. He phoned Angela Merkel and asked her to do it and got another flea in his ear. He phoned Barack Obama, and Obama must have been the weakest endorsement of a position I've ever heard. It was something like, we can't like the United Kingdom, but it's up to the folks up there in Scotland. So he was begging. The only person actually got to endorse him fully was a guy called Tony Abbott, who was the Australian Prime Minister at the time. And that day that Abbott came out and said that forces of darkness, as he's put it, would be really overjoyed if Scotland voted for independence, I met a group of expatriate Australians who'd come to their hometown of Glasgow. My hometown was sitting in the lounge in the Star and Garter Hotel, which I was opening the refurbishment of that day, and they called me across, and they said, "We're forming ALBA." And I was looking at them and thinking, they're a wee bit old for a pop group. They'll need some of that artificial intelligence work that Harrison Ford has been getting done over the last few weeks. But they said, no, we're forming a group. When we get back to Australia, it'll be anybody but Abbott for the next election, for having the effrontery to interfere. Tell Tony Abbott I'm fully engaged in a discussion here in Maryhill, and I've no time to take his calls. So they formed anybody but Abbott. But interestingly enough, about 6 months after the referendum, Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, the one world leader, and I use the term loosely, who'd intervened, begged by David Cameron to come to his aid in the last few desperate days as he saw Scotland about to vote for independence. 6 months later, he got deposed in Australia in a coup. It's a democratic coup within the Australian Labour Party, or within the Australian Tory Party, rather, National Party, by a guy called Turnbull, which, as you might note, was a Scottish name. So Agent Turnbull did the job in Australia for that guy Abbott arguing against their aspirations. Anyway, Westminster, the establishment, Whitehall, David Cameron, George Osborne were extremely discomforted in the days before the Scottish referendum. So therefore, with that race memory in the powers that are at Westminster, they are not easily going to present another opportunity for the people of Scotland to have the ability to revisit that decision and exercise a right of self-determination, hence the roadblock. Well, if you meet a roadblock, there's only two things you can do. Well, we can give up. You can turn the engine off and say, I'm stuck. Or alternatively, you can drive around it or you can drive through it. And I suggest that's what Scotland should do. We should go right through the roadblock that Westminster has erected. And the way to do that, since we're not going to be allowed to have another referendum, is to use the thing that even Westminster can't stop, which is elections. Either the election for the Westminster Parliament or the election for the Scottish Parliament. And say in unmistakable terms, this we regard as a mandate for independence for Scotland. And when you do that, of course, it's not good enough just to win a majority of seats. You've got to win a majority of votes. Because you're saying in the absence of referendum, we see an election as the way forward. Now, this is where we come to the wee bit of controversial bit. As you may have noticed, my former colleagues in the Scottish National Party are having a wee bit of bother at the present moment, which is probably not going to go away anytime soon. It would be greatly to everybody's benefit if there's a recognition of that, and therefore to fight the next Westminster election, instead of fighting it on a party political basis, fight it on a Scotland United for Independence basis. Now, there's no demerit or discredit to the MPs that are there, the ones that are left anyway, because so many of them seem to be flying the coop at the present moment, because they can stand as SNP Scotland United for Independence, because they're the largest party, the biggest party, the most powerful party. But they should make room for the other parties that support independence in some seats, ALBA, Greens, Scottish Socialists, maybe an independent candidate or two who has a high profile and a supporter of independence, and make sure that in every one of the 57 Scottish seats that will be at the next election next year, there'll be one candidate standing on a manifesto commitment, paragraph 1. I'm standing on a mandate, a popular mandate, for the people of Scotland to instruct their government to negotiate independence from Westminster. No ifs, no buts, appeal for that popular mandate. And if that's done, then an election won't be fought on the deficiencies of the SNP administration at Holyrood. It'll be fought on the principle of Scotland's right of self-determination. I was reading a paper the other day from Neil Hanvey, the MP for Kirkcaldy Commission, from a Professor McCorkadale. And it's a learned paper. This guy, McCorkadale, was the United Nations' favourite lawyer. He's the guy who advised the Baltic states. He's advising the Chagos Islanders. He has every state in the United Nations, bar 4, now on the side of the Chagos Islanders against the UK. He's the world-leading expert in international law, and it's a detailed paper, and it's a learned paper, it's a long paper, and it's a complex one. And what it says, in essence, Scotland's a real nation, a real group of people, and therefore has the right of self-determination. And if you've got the right of self-determination, it doesn't say you have the right of self-determination, but some other lot have the right to veto it. It's a right of self-determination. And in that learned paper, Robert McCorkadale merely articulates what any person in this city of Glasgow will tell you, whether they believe in independence or not. If you go to the streets of Glasgow, you go around Maryhill and say, look, is Scotland a real nation? Do we have the right of self-determination? The answer is yes. And they would regard it as ridiculous to say that Scotland was second class, second rate, and somehow didn't rate that right of self-determination. But it's the job of politicians to make that possible, to make that aspiration and give it the form to bring it into a reality. That's what John Wheatley did in the 1920s. He made the aspiration to decent housing for the people a reality by enacting a Social Tenancy Act which allowed the great social expansion of proper housing for the working classes. He made an aspiration a reality. And in every single one of these 59 ALBA group meetings, the purpose and the aim is to make a reality of the aspiration of Scotland's right of self-determination. So it's a great pleasure to be in Maryhill. It's a worthy addition to the ALBA group meetings. I wish you all the best for self-determination for Maryhill. You know, Billy Wolfe, a long time ago, SNP leader, and when I grew up in West Lothian, he said, remember, Alec, he said, the SNP stood for two things, independence for Scotland and a parliament for Bowness. Right. We're here at the wee ALBA group. We're standing for two things, independence for Scotland and self-determination for the people of Maryhill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. Now it's your chance to ask your questions. If you can kindly raise your hand and say your name if you wish and ask your question. And I'll repeat it so for the benefit of those who are watching on the live stream. Who would like to start us off? Yes. And chat there.
That's a question for Alex. It was,
what's your name?
Sean O'Neill.
Sean. Okay.
Just want to say this isn't the first time that you've been in Mindful Alex to support people here. As First Minister in 2012, you might remember you helped launch the district heating system that provides the community with heat and hot water. The aim of that project
Sean, and for the benefit of those who are watching, because there's not a roving mic, so I'll repeat the questions. Basically, in a nutshell, Sean, from the Community Hub here, heard a lot of words from politicians, but want to know, Alex, are you in it for the long haul with Sean? Yeah. Alex.
I remember well the project, the district heating project, and myself and Alec Neil, who was housing minister at the time. We signed the project, it was backed up with SSE, and it was meant to deliver what it was promised to deliver. Now, Sean, you asked me a minute for a long haul. Have I taken any interest since? Well, I can say that we passed a motion at the ALBA conference, but also I advised the residents group and the excellent demonstrations that took place outside the offices of SSE. And if I were in a position of authority at the present moment, I would force the power company to abide by the commitments it had made to this community. Force them to do it. Because it was public money that made the heating project possible in the first place, and it's not acceptable for a private company not to honour these obligations, not just to the letter, but there's no point in saying we're honouring an obligation to the letter and it's unfortunate that the folk have to pay higher bills. I mean, that's ridiculous. Honour the obligations in terms of the spirit of what the district heating was meant to deliver. And, well, you say, how do you force a private company to do that? Well, I can think of 100 ways that you do that. And you do it with a smile on your face, but it would be no difficulty whatsoever if I was First Minister or Alec Neil was Housing Minister just now to make sure that SSE honoured their obligations to this community.
Nick, you may wish to add, Nick?
Well, the one thing to say is that the power station is owned by the Wheatley Group. So the SSE component in that situation, the third party, doesn't need to be there necessarily. So we've long asked for access to their books to see what is the financial relationship between the two. And we simply don't know. It's very opaque. And we know that with district heating, in general, there has been, it's necessary, utterly necessary, far more effective than heat pumps for reducing carbon emissions. And, it's not an individual solution, it's a collective solution. But it has to be treated collectively, and unfortunately it's been treated like it's an individual situation. Whenever you deal with SSE, they always ask, what's your situation? Palm you off as an individual, whereas everyone is in the same boat. So I think there needs to be better regulation on district heating generally, because having a third party come in and become a monopoly where there's little regulation, that's not helping. But.
Okay, thank you. Sean, I would just add, just for your information, that raising awareness relative to issues and keeping the public psyche is really important. And I've not read it yet, but I do know that Alex gave, I think it must have been the best part of a 30-minute interview to one of the Herald Features writers on this specific issue. So I'm very much hoping that brings it into the domain of people's thought now, given this meeting today. So thank you very much indeed for your question. Next. Yes, sir.
That has not happened. What has happened is we have seen the appearance of Wheatley Group, which nobody voted for. It's merged with all sorts of other merged or brought into its structure all sorts of other tenants associations. It's not just heating, it's also finance and Scott Cash. We are watching in Scotland the creation of a monopoly organisation which will have enormous impact on the people of Scotland. It requires, I believe, let's turn this into a question, are you prepared to break that monopoly up and stop it from recombining again?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
So Murdo, you're right next to the mic. So I'm expecting that people have been able to hear that question, but are you prepared to break the monopoly Alex, as Murdo has described to us?
Yes.
Who's next? Yes, at the back. Can you stand up?
Hello, my name
myself and I think quite a lot of people in the room voted SNP 1 and ALBA 2. The SNP took those votes as justification for terrible legislation such as the DRR. How can we ask people to vote for a party that has a history of with leadership interpreting manifesto to mean what they want it to mean and to implement terrible legislation? I don't see how we can ask people to vote for that part unless the manifesto is only about independence and not about any other policy.
Thank you very much indeed. In a nutshell, the question is, how can we make Scotland United work if the votes were taken for granted in 2021? Scotland, I didn't catch your name. All I know is this Paul showed me how to get here, so thank you, Paul. Alex.
Well, Paul, who does the directions as well. Let's see if we can do some political direction. I think lots of people on lots of issues, not just the GRR, but on a range of issues, would have reason to be disappointed with the SNP government in recent years, okay? Can I tell you that there are few people who've got more reason to be disappointed with the leadership of the Scottish National Party in recent times than I do personally. But, you know, there are some things which are more important than disappointment, more important than individual disappointment or injustice or whatever it might be. And that is the principle of self-determination, the principle of the rights of the people of Scotland. Now, you answered your own question, Paul. You know, it would only be acceptable if this was what happened. That's why part of the Scotland United for Independence strategy is that the first paragraph of every participating party says we are standing on a popular mandate to negotiate independence for Scotland. Notwithstanding to do our best, notwithstanding to do what we can, notwithstanding to get a referendum sometime never, we're standing on a platform asking for a popular mandate to negotiate independence for our country. On that basis, to me, that would be the most important thing. And it would also be a message to the rest of Scotland. I mean, look, I don't like a number of people in the hierarchy of the Scottish National Party. It doesn't include the current First Minister, incidentally. Hamza Yousaf, a pleasant person, very pleasant person. I gave him his first job. If I didn't think he was a decent guy, I wouldn't have given him that job. I'm not talking about a holiday job, I'm talking about his first real job. Not in government, I'm talking about first working job. I no doubt there's lots of folk in the SNP don't like me. In fact, I can vouch for the fact. I think there's a lot of folk in the SNP don't like me. Mind you, I think they're worried in the hierarchy. There's a lot of folk in the SNP do like me. But other than that, doesn't matter. I look at the Scottish Green Party, and I have to tell you, I've been sympathetic to Green politics all my life. But I look at the Scottish Green Party, I don't recognise green politics. I see obsessions with all sorts of things which have got very little to do with green politics. But if they're prepared to put in the first line of their manifesto, they're looking for a mandate for independence for Scotland and be part of a Scotland United coalition, then so be it, because that is an opportunity. Now, that's what's on offer. A number of folk in the SNP support it. I hope a lot of people support it, and I hope in October the SNP decides to go down that road, because it's the only way to fight an election on independence as opposed to fighting in a whole range of other issues where the SNP will not come out well. You see, I don't think it would be a great advance for Scotland to go back under Labour control. You know, I spent 25 years of my life trying to extract the dead hand of Labour control from Scotland, and all the opportunities that were missed as a result of that control. The whole range of the first oil and gas boom, we're the first country in history to discover oil and gas in major quantities and end up relatively poorer compared to our competitors. We glance across the North Sea to Norway, and we see the richest developed country on earth who had exactly access to the same resource that Scotland had in comparative terms. We stand now on the brink of another revolution. We have, because Scotland has large territorial waters, and because the cheapest way to produce energy is through deep offshore floating wind platforms, that's the revolution, which will be bigger in industrial terms than North Sea oil and gas, and we stand on the brink of that, and if we're not careful, we're going to miss that opportunity. We look across the Irish Sea, and we see a country which has got more funds in its treasury just now than it knows what to do with. It's going to become the first country to develop and establish the sovereign wealth fund in Ireland without having a great natural resource as the source of that fund. And if all we collectively don't say, look, come on, these are opportunities which will not come again. I mean, fool me once, shame on you. Fool us twice, shame on me. And shame on us collectively as a country. So I'm just saying, Paul, we should subordinate all our other grievances and difficulties and arguments and personalities for that one objective. And that's the objective of securing a mandate to negotiate independence for our country.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, sir. What's your name, sorry? Christopher. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher, who clearly wears your politics, wearing your politics on your sleeve and have clearly spoken to quite a number of people in the audience. I'm not sure there was a question, but I think what you have said is certainly worthy of comment. Alex.
Chris, I've started a new television programme last 2 weeks, and the Thursday's edition, you might ask where do you get it? Well, it's online, every platform, total spectrum dominance, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all these other ones I can't mind the name of, just press the button and you see it. You might say, why is it just online? Well, I asked the BBC, and they says, I'll get back to you. But they never did. I asked STV, and they said, we can't afford you. And that's probably true. I see STV released a statement when Vio, whatever it is, said they were going out of business and wouldn't cover the Scotland games. And STV released a statement. The Scottish Government said, we're working hard to secure more football for our viewers. They don't have any football. But anyway, STV couldn't afford me, so it's all online. Now, you may ask, Christopher, why am I saying this as this great big advert to Scotland Speaks of Alex Salmond, as opposed to addressing your remarks? It's because a segment on the programme is called Scotland's Hidden Heroes. It's a 5-minute section where I talk about somebody who's changed Scotland, changed the world, and nobody's ever heard of. And the first one, in the first programme, a week past Thursday, was a guy called Bernard a Kilwinning. And you might say, who's Bernard a Kilwinning? Well, Chris, you just recited the words of Bernard a Kilwinning because he was Abbot Arbroath, Chancellor of Scotland, and he wrote probably the Declaration of Arbroath, which Chris just recited to us. And Chris, you're absolutely right. After a bit, about 100 of us, before the bit, about 100 of us remain alive, will never submit to the subjugation with English. There is a more important phrase in the declaration that Bernard a Kilwinning wrote. And that's the bit that says, good King Robert, fantastic guy, he's our saviour, he's our new Joshua, but if he sells us out, if he doesn't do the business, we'll drive him out as our enemy and get someone else. And it's the first articulation, 700 and more years ago, of the contractual idea of government. Government is there not to serve itself, but to serve the people. Contractual government would do the Wynford Tenants Association a great deal of good. I.e., if the council or the Wheatley group or the Scottish Government remembered that contractually they are in existence not to serve themselves, but to serve the people, if they remembered the Declaration of Arbroath and Bernard a Kilwinning and Christopher's words, then this community and this Scotland would be a better place. But listen, let's think about this. We thought of it. It was born here, in Scotland. And I know it sounds unlikely it was born in Kilwinning, but he did move to Arbroath, you know. It was born here. It's ours. Why on earth should we not demand the right to exercise that concept of democracy that we thought of in the first place?
Next question, please. Yes, sir, and then behind you. Yes. And your name first, please.
Ray James.
Ray.
English Scots, yes.
Welcome.
Former SNP branch officer, founder member, ALBA, East of Archer. What do you, or would you agree with me, Alex, that if SNP don't come to the table by next year for the UK general election, we are really short of time that not only with the Greens having already announced that they'll stand in
Thank you very much indeed, Durie. And for the benefit of those watching online, in a nutshell, if I can encapsulate Ray's question is, are we now facing the potential for losing nationalist control, I suppose, in terms of numbers of Scottish representatives at Westminster and ensuing Holyrood elections? And therefore, are we running out of time? Alex.
Well, yes, we are, Ray. We are running out of time. Look, you can only make an offer. And the offer's well meant, because I think it would be the best thing for Scotland next year. It's because of what's happening to Scotland and what will happen to Scotland and continue to happen to Scotland if we don't do something about it. And it's the right thing to do. You know, you have to recognise that if a route is stopped, you have to find a new way forward. You can't just pretend or say it's no fair. You know, a big Westminster did it and ran away and all the rest of it. You have to find another route forward and be prepared to back it up. So we can offer it, and if the SNP say, no, we're the cock of the walk, we can, then they're going to get a very profound shock. From ALBA's point of view, if the SNP say no, then I'm not saying we're going to stand in every seat in Scotland, but we're standing in quite a few at the Westminster election. Because, you know, if you don't get Scotland United, you have to offer people the proposition yourself. And I can tell you, in 3 years' time, ALBA will be standing. Every person in Scotland will get a chance to vote ALBA at the Scottish elections. I can absolutely promise you that.
And there was someone just behind you, and then we've got two other questions. Maybe their hands are up at the moment. So, lady in red, as they say, followed by the chap in the jacket. Yes.
Thank you. I'd just like to say, sorry, Laura, my president.
Laura.
12 years ago, I ended up hosting a couple of homeless women in my house because of a series of failures, Glasgow City Council's homelessness system, and then the Salmond community picking them up, making phone calls to the Unity Centre, which I then volunteered for. I ended up with these two women sleeping in my home because there was no accommodation available for them that night. The reason for that, I found out by putting in a freedom of information request, was because there was a 15-stone each cave in Glasgow that night. I've seen it again in the news this week where they tried to blame the Rangers Newcastle again for the fact that there was no accommodation available. Now, my major hope when the SNP came to power was actually that they were going to do something about sorting out the temporary accommodation, the emergency accommodation situation in Glasgow, which has been in collapse since I moved to this country, and it's just been getting worse since. And the problem has been that despite being investigated by the government, I think on 4 different occasions, despite all of the different, think tanks being set up to deal with the homelessness issue, to discuss what the issues are, none of this is getting resolved because the problem is that there doesn't seem to be any incentive on social landlords to actually provide that housing that people need in the city. And the problem is just getting worse and worse. And my question is, I guess, to everybody is, if the cause of independence is, if people are becoming disillusioned with the idea of independence, is that because we failed to deliver independence, or is it because we failed to deliver everything else we promised to do? And one of those things was housing the homeless. And I wanted to show the people who are here today that don't live in the Windford the newsletter I've got here, sorry. The newsletter of the Wheatley group sent out this week. The resident, and on the second page, or the third page, sorry, it's a whole series of lies. This is 2 pages of lies that we can actually prove our lies. This is Wheatley once again telling us that the blocks cannot be retrofitted, that they commissioned a report that found that would compromise the structure of the blocks. That's not true. That report, there is no report that says that. In fact, there are several reports since that say the opposite. They say that they followed all the precautions, we think that following all regulations to prevent any environmental impact. But they've not done an impact assessment. All of this is lies. I guess we're talking about running out of time. We're running out of time here on the Windford. I don't know if you noticed on the way in, but they've actually boarded up these flats. They're so concerned about us trying to do an occupation that they've actually boarded up flats three floors high, as if we're going to get ladders and break in through the windows. But this is what we're up against, and we don't have the resources that we have
come to you in a second. I'm going to come to you in a second. Thanks, Laura. I'm not even going to attempt to encapsulate what you articulated so perfectly because I won't do it justice. But suffice to say, Laura's looking for a way forward. We've heard, you've read out parts of what she refers to as lies in the latest Wheatley Group newsletter. You'll probably be extremely aware of this yourself. Nick, what can we do? What can be done now, fast, clearly, because of time?
Well, I think we need to go from this platform that we've achieved today to continue to push in the public eye, public arena, because it is coming to the fore, the housing crisis. You know, every time you open a newspaper, there's a talk of housing crisis. In this city, it's just working class experience. The mode average wage is less than the mean average rent. You know, it's coming to the bit, as you say in Scots. So we need to connect that experience, and we need to mobilise people around that. But it is the wider question as well. You know, back in 2007, when Alex first got into power, the Scottish Tenants organisation launched a campaign called Scotland's for Council Housing, and approached the then UK Chancellor, I think it was Alistair Darling at the time, and said, you know, we need 100,000 new public homes. But the simple fact is, the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the borrowing power to build all those homes in a wonder to meet the aspirations. But, you know, from that early days of the Scottish Government, you know, public homes did start to be built. But the need is so great. And we certainly need to look at the empty homes that we've got around the country, because there's tens of thousands of empty homes, and repurpose them. And we need to tool up our local authorities to be able to gain control of those homes. But right here is a weeping sore, 600 social homes that could be let out right now. And we know that. And we know that the way that housing is delivered in the country, I think Murdo raised the question earlier about the Wheatley Group and its monopoly power. You know, they're now based in 90 local authorities. Now, I remember a day when the Glasgow Housing Association was a clearinghouse that was going to end itself in 10 years and become Coothy little community-controlled housing association. So we've gone in completely the wrong direction. And I think it's fair to say as well that the current Scottish Government, I don't see much. Really, the last housing minister we've had was Alec Neil, I'll be honest. So, you know, I've had dealings with the housing minister where basically we're pointed to the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, which is the lobby group for the Wheatley Group. So I think, coming back to Murdo's point, the Wheatley Group does need to be broken up. That's my own view. But we need to save the high flats here, continue the fight, but also we need to tool up local authorities to build houses or gain control of houses as quickly as possible to alleviate the crisis. And we also need the borrowing powers to deliver the homes that we need. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you very much, Nick. Alex.
Well, Laurie, I'm not going to do a defence of my record as First Minister, because, you know, that was tested in 2011, and we want an absolute majority in a proportional parliament. Didn't mean everything was perfect, but, you know, one or two things did happen, like free education, restoring a free health service, free dentistry, a whole range of things. Homelessness dropped in these years, incidentally. And we tried to build as many houses as we could within the constraints of borrowing. I mean, the very simple way to have a vast expansion of social housing in Scotland is, of course, to wipe the housing debt. You wipe the housing debt and it releases the funds to start building the homes that people need in the scale that people need. I think, I mean, and my campaigns on housing continue. I mean, I've been at the Homeless Project and the Umbrella campaign for premises for the project, you know, so, I mean, and if I were First Minister now and I was here with you today, I wouldn't say all your problems would be over, but certainly they'd be making a good deal of progress. One of the things I learned and have learned is that the bodies we used to look to deliver the public purpose, in certain cases, and I'm not saying that every housing association in Scotland is not doing its job, because I know many decent housing associations who are doing their best. But, you know, the performance of the Wheatley Group, as the biggest social landlord in Scotland, is wrong and inadequate and has to be changed. And that's why, of course, political representatives are important, because you've got organisations like the Wheatley Group, they live and die by the public funds they get granted. If there's a question of public funds, they'll change their tune like that. And that's why political representation is important. But the one thing I would say that we have to build in, one of the things I like Wynford is the spirit and the campaign and the community aspect to it. Listen, if the landlord who was going to demolish these flats was the Duke of Buccleuch, let's say the Duke of Buccleuch owned these flats as opposed to the Wheatley Group, this community would have the right of preemptive buy. You know that? You would have the right of preemption to buy the flats. That's right. If the Duke of Buccleuch, under the land legislation that I augmented, and a fund, incidentally, to support the purchase. I mean, in my village in Aberdeenshire, there's a community park which was bought off ready-mix concrete on using that preemptive right to buy. There's a community facility in Bodham that's bought off the RAF, exercising the community right to buy. So I think we should extend the community right to buy, supported, not just so as it's bits of the Highlands and islands and rural areas, which it largely is at the present moment, and it's a good thing, incidentally. But we see self-determination in community groups in our great cities and our urban areas as well. We have to find a way of bringing the powerful to account. Now, one way, of course, is to elect the right politicians, and there'll never be an option to that, incidentally, because you elect the right politicians, you'll get the right answers. If you elect the wrong ones, you'll get a lot of disappointment. But there must be other ways to allow a campaigning community group more access, more power, more facility, more ability to hold the powerful to account. There's lots of folk in this country, in this city, who think they know better than the people who are in communities living it. They think they know better, and some of them do it for the best of reasons, the noblest of purposes. I'm sure they go to bed at night thinking, I've done another good thing today. But it never works. What works is allowing communities to determine from themselves the conditions they're in. And if you get that community spirit, it's worth its weight in gold. But that weight in gold maybe should be backed up by public funds and public representatives.
Ian.
If your party would like to follow us, that
Thank you. Well, Ian, what Alex hasn't yet mentioned is that I produce the programme Scotland Speaks, and I'm the editor. Therefore, I get to decide the subject matter of the show each week. And I'm now committing to all of you people here today that we will do an entire one-hour show committed to the Wineford project, where we'll come out and speak to all of you. And not in the distant future, over the next few weeks, we will do that, and I'll liaise with Nick if that's okay. And all we'll do is ask you to come and speak to us and give us interviews, and we'll highlight the project. And given that our first couple of shows have got at least 500,000 views on Facebook and many more on other sites, I think a lot more people who need to be in the know about what's going on here will be in the know once we're finished with that. So thank you very much, and that's our personal commitment. Well done, Ian. Well done, Ian. Any more questions? Yes. So, gentleman here, and then... Is that you, Moira Brown? Yeah. You're going to have to wait your turn. There's not many people who have got the guts to say that to you. Gentleman here, and then we'll come to Moira Brown. Yes, sir.
My name is John Black.
John.
I'm an ALBA member. I also support the SNP, and I also support in fact, I was a founder member of the Good Scots for years too. What I would like to ask Alex, if I may, you mentioned BBC approaching, you mentioned presumably STV, I don't remember you mentioning that, but you mentioned a lot of TV programmes, TV broadcasters that you approach. I wonder if you approach Broadcasting Scotland. I know that Broadcasting Scotland they are operating under the same difficulties that you currently are operating on. They are operating through the internet and other streaming services. But I would be very disappointed in them if they did not broadcast any of those programs if you're willing to allow them to, or if you could come to some arrangement with them. And Broadcasting Scotland, to my mind, are doing the same good job in a different way as in Durie Live, and we do need this communication to develop in Scotland. I do hope that you either have already or will ask Broadcasting Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed, John. I should say that I had the privilege, John, of doing some broadcasting from Broadcasting Scotland at the very, very start when they were just setting up their studios. And it would be remiss of me as a fellow nationalist not to say, because I know they've got a fundraiser going, that please, if you can, donate to Broadcasting Scotland, because they are a platform that needs support. So that's a shameless plug from me for a fellow broadcaster. But then I'll pass to Alex now to answer the rest of your question, John.
Yeah, I mean, John, there's a fair amount of cooperation. I mean, if you go onto the Wings Over Scotland platform, you'll see a really nice button to press for Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond. So there's going to be a lot of cooperation there. It has mentioned 500,000 views of the first show, which is absolutely true. A few of them were in Kuala Lumpur, right enough, but nonetheless, I think if it's the Kuala Lumpur folk are watching the Wineford project, that's all to the better, international recognition for Wineford. But the more significant thing is if you look at the viewership, our first show got more viewers than the equivalent presentation of Scotland Tonight. You know, so that's more than STV. I mean, I said somebody yesterday, we got more than BBC 9. They said, well, that's not saying very much, but they were more impressed by the STV thing. So I'll be very happy if Tasmina allows me to present the programme on the Wineford project, and we're very happy to cooperate with other broadcasters.
Got anything to say on that particular issue? No. Moira Brown.
Since people are telling stories, I may as well have some self-indulgence. I'm in my 91st year and supported fish from Cookridge
To move on, I joined the SNP in the mid-50s, and up until 4 years ago, I really didn't question my membership. But it took me 2 years and a visitation from members, in fact, the leader of the ALBA party, unexpectedly to my house in Glasgow, to convince me that this was the way to go. Every time a football match, and I go to every Scottish one, home and abroad, I sing Flower of Scotland. At one time, I thought, there are many flowers serving us in the place in Edinburgh. Sorry, there are more weeds, and the weeds have overtaken the flowers. And what I'm going to say, when I hear promises from Mr. Salmond and Tasmina about bringing things up at ALBA conference, they will be brought up and voted for, and hopefully it is going to, if they start fast treatment. As many stars that there are, you'll get that, and your community needs and wants and wishes will be met by those servants of that I am sure. And what I would say to you all, read the business of doubting whether the main platform for any next election that comes is for independence. Yes, we all have our hobby horses and things, but without that independence, we don't have fiscal autonomy to spend money where it's needed and things like. With independence, I never ever thought I would waken up the next day and all was going to be wonderful. That's when the real thing to me begins. And the way to do it is to vote for those who first of all, top of the list, believe in independence and see and examine as to whether they're working for it. Sorry, I've self-indulged. And if you think anything I've said is wrong, put it down to my age.
Moira, if you can't indulge in your 91st year, I don't know when you can self-indulge, quite frankly. And you said you're in your 91st year. Are you having a party when it happens? Are you going to have a birthday party? When you're 90, another one. Who is that? Another one. Thank you. Yeah, for you. Quite right, Moira. And as Moira said, Moira's been to every single Scotland national team football game, perhaps bar maybe two, but quite a record. But Moira said, Alex and to Nick, because we're coming to the close now, and I'd like to think about closing remarks, that the Scottish Parliament seems to be more full of weeds than they are of flowers, and the next election needs to be about independence. Those are the fundamental points. I'm not even going to ask you if you agree. Could be afraid to say anything other to Moira Brown, but Nick, What would you like to say to Moira? That's what she said. The next election has to be about independence. She's in her 91st year. She's tired of waiting and she wants results.
Well, I think the other remark was we're running out of time. I think the gentleman there said it. And it's obvious that, you know, there's lots of issues, but we do as a country need to come together to address them because things are not improving. And, you know, we need to exert the power that we have. So let's do that and let's get organised. And I'll leave it at that.
Alex.
Well, you know, there's a lot of shortages of stuff. If you detect a shortage of candles, you know that Moira's having another birthday. I went to sign Moira up for ALBA. She was our 6,000th member a couple of years back. And as I was trying to get, I've been lovely shortbread, incidentally, Moira, it was first class. And as I was leaning across, she said, I want to negotiate a life membership. That's the spirit that Scotland needs now.
Now, before we move to closing remarks, I'll ask the panellists to kindly prepare this last question.
It's something that's going to bring a tear to my eyes and probably Alex's. Winifred Durie sent me a book signed by herself, thanking me as an Englishman to join my party. She sent it through her then, I think he was her then whip, Andrew Walsh, and then when he looked at it, she just snatched his phone and phoned him up. That just wiped me. And it was, well, it's because of her support to Alex that, and my belief that Alex is nothing wrong, innocent. What's your thoughts about beautiful lady?
Okay, thank you. Your name?
Steve.
Steve. So I'm going to ask you, and it seems appropriate that we close actually another meeting with thoughts on the late great Winnie Ewing. So I'm going to ask the panel to encapsulate the remarks about her in their closing remarks. And I'm going to go first to Nick. Closing remarks relative to the meeting, and then, of course.
Well, in terms of Winnie Ewing, Stop the World, Maryhill wants to get on. And I think, you know, what Alec was saying about independence for Maryhill and about the idea of community buyouts, it's close to our heart. Obviously, this community once fought off a plan to privatise the Kleiner Street land, where it used to be a housing scheme. And it was the City Council that was trying to privatise that. We defeated them, and we defeated them with a bid for a community buyout. It's unfortunately mothballed at the moment because we've got other fights. And, you know, there's old adage, think local, act global. Laura mentioned, you know, the dire situation in housing, and that's obviously a subject close to my heart. But you don't change things at a macro level without first fighting at a micro level and getting organised. And we can only fight where we stand. So, as I said in the last remarks, we need to get organised. I think that's absolutely the way forward. And thanks very much for the opportunity to come and raise the case on a much grander basis. That will be very, very helpful indeed. So a big bit of progress today for our community, but also in terms of ALBA, you know, we have put forward the proposal of 100,000 public homes. That came from Commonweal and their research, but it also is backed up by, you know, those known radicals, the Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers. You know, it's also backed up by the old Scotland's for Council Housing campaign that was launched by the late, great John Carricker. And I'm sure Ian, who's remarked earlier, will know all about that. But, you know, that's what's needed to address the thing. But also we need the borrowing powers to achieve that. And as Alex said, to write off the debt. But we start local. We don't start at the national picture, and must never be overawed by what's arraigned against us. Because otherwise, you know, as Chris was saying, if there's only 100 of us, we can still drive the wrong uns out. you know. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you, Nick. Alex.
Well, Steve, the point about being thanked as an Englishman for supporting Scotland's aspirations by Winnie Ewing, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I spoke about Moira Brown's spirit, so I'll speak for a minute about Winnie Ewing's spirit. Robert Cunningham Graham was a founder member of the Scottish National Party, but way before that, he'd been the founder member with Keir Hardie of the Scottish Labour Party. In fact, I've seen a membership card of not a life membership, Moira, a membership card of the Scottish Labour Party, the first Scottish Labour Party, with President Robert Cunningham Graham, leader Keir Hardie. So a very, very important figure. Robert Cunningham Graham once said that Scotland's problem is not with the English, who are a great and noble people. Scotland's problem is those Scots who are born without imagination. And that's what we have to address to our fellow citizens. Plenty of people have had it drummed out of them. The hope, the ambition, the wish, the belief. People have been indoctrinated to believe they're too stupid or too poor or no clever enough. We're better leaving things to the political masters in Westminster. You know, people who are extravagant players of the political game, like people like Liz Truss, whose careful management of the nation's finances has reduced just about every one of us to penury, or a man who carefully looked at the future and the welfare of his fellow human beings like Boris Johnson, or Rishi Sunak, a man who doesn't care about mortgage rates, you know, for the folk in the south of England, because he's never had to have a mortgage in his life. I can promise you, down to his last billion, Rishi has never bought anything on tick in his puff. Well, wonder he doesn't think that high interest rates are a problem. Well, they are a big problem. They destroy people's businesses, they destroy their assets. As they rebound through, they destroy people's lives. So you can either think we should allow these giants of the political scene to govern this nation's affairs and to govern its resources, because there is a reason why they are so anxious to hang on to us. You know, one of the great lies in life, the cheques in the post. And I'm from the London Treasury and I want to help Scotland. They want Scotland for its resources. It's bankrolled Britain, bankrolled bankrupt Britain for the last 60 years. They're looking at the Scottish continental shelf, the best productive area for electricity of the cheapest form, and not saying how many Scottish pensioners can we save this winter by giving them the allowance of decent prices for their electricity. They're saying how much revenue can we gather in to fill the holes in the Westminster finances. So we can either believe that they know what's best for us, we can believe that Glasgow Council or the Wheatley Group know what's best for this community, or we can recognise that the spirit, the audacity, the wish, the belief is within ourselves to take charge of our communities and our country. One story about Winnie Ewing, which I was privileged enough to deliver a eulogy at her memorial service last Saturday in Inverness. But I love this story because it speaks of the spirit of that woman and her ability to disregard convention or what was accepted or what was considered proper and do what she knew was absolutely right. The SNP got virtually wiped out in 1979 at the general election. Some people would say deservedly, but they got wiped out. They had 2 MPs left. 4 or 5 weeks later, Winnie decides to stand for the Highlands and Isles. No chance. That was the general estimation. She has no chance whatsoever. Russell Johnson, highly distinguished Liberal MP for Inverness, undoubtedly the nation's and the BBC's favourite. In fact, the BBC were so confident that Russell would win that they allocated the seat to the Liberals 3 days before the votes were counted, because they didn't count the Highlands and Islands on a Sunday for obvious reasons. So, in the dying embers of that campaign, the Camanachd Cup, that's the shinty. The big shinty match is taking place in Oban. And Russell, who was a big figure, a nice band incidentally, in the Shinty Association gets presented to the two teams. So there he is on the pitch as a candidate getting presented to the two teams on telly. And Winnie is fuming in the stand. Now Winnie, in an instant, has the choice between sitting there fuming in the stand and whining about it or doing something about it. So she got up in her high heels, marched onto the pitch and presented herself to the two teams on telly. Now, the establishment, the press and journal, the Scotsman, the Glasgow Herald, as it was called then, were absolutely convinced Winnie Ewing has gone too far. Brass neck. She's finally finished. Nobody is going to take this ridiculous behaviour of presenting herself to the team. The big headlines. Winnie's brass neck, the end of Ewing. And I was working as a young assistant agricultural economist for the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries for Scotland. And I got a note from the chief economist to go and see him that morning. And I went in and he had the papers spread out on his desk. And understandably, I feared the worst. And he looked at me and said, "Are you still associated with that lot?" And I said, yeah. And he said, "Well, I just want you to tell Mrs. Ewing, if you see her, that that's the sort of spirit we need to defend Scotland." And he was absolutely correct, because a few weeks later, Winnie swept the board, swept Russell Johnson aside, and won the Highlands and Islands. It's the ability not to take second best, not to accept what's established and orthodox, the norm, not to believe the rubbish that this nation gets fed in its mainstream media, but to have the spirit to believe in the country, in the community. And if we can encapsulate that spirit, then we'll take some stopping. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. I'm now going to pass to Catherine for a vote of thanks, Catherine McKernan, and then I shall close the meeting. Catherine.
I just want to say thank you very much, all of you, for inviting us into the heart of the Wynford community. It has been an incredible experience. The questions have been fantastic. They've allowed us to really hear and learn what it is you guys feel and to promise what we're going to do. The thing is, there are lots and lots of politicians who promise the earth, who talk a lot and who do nothing. And just as Scotland is being asset stripped, the Wynford is obviously being asset stripped as well. The thing about Mr. Alex Salmond is that he doesn't promise what he's not going to deliver. This is a man of action, not a person of weak words. And thank you very much, all of you, for joining us on Independence Live, and thanks to the Independence Live guys, Gary and Stuart as well, and to Tasmina, Ahmed-Sheikh, our chairperson, Nick from the Wynford Residents Association, and again, thanks very much to Mr. Alex Salmond. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine, and just a couple of thanks from me. Can I thank the local campaigning group of ALBA, the LACU, Glasgow LACU, for being here, and they've got a lovely little stall there with some saltires. Now, Moira, you'll need them for the next game. Mind you, you've probably got those, but you can take some from the stall. And the ALBA books are available to you. Please, if you're not yet a member, consider joining us on our journey. It's ALBA stands for independence as soon as possible, not in the future, because people need for it to happen now. We don't have time on our side. Please do consider joining us as a party. I'm sure you'll find it a wonderful, uplifting experience because we talk about exactly these sort of things. I just want to remind you of our promise to cover this issue in an upcoming show over the next few weeks. And just now to thank Independence Live again, to Gary and Stuart, faithfully here as always. Thank you very much indeed. And Independence Live have a fundraiser going. Please contribute to that. Please contribute to Broadcasting Scotland's fundraiser. We need independence broadcasters here in Scotland more than ever. Thank you to Catherine. Thank you to Nick Durie for helping to bring this meeting together. And this is actually our first hybrid meeting whereby it's, as well as being about the ALBA book, is about something of great interest and importance to the community. And I think it has worked extremely well. I don't know who's phoning. Who could it possibly be, Alex? I've run out of ideas. Somebody needs to speak to somebody very quickly. And can I, of course, thank Alex Salmond for his contribution to today's meeting. This is the 59th event, and although Nick and Catherine, it may well be your first and second that you've been at a meeting, perhaps even more than that. But Alex has done the 58th that have preceded this, and this is the 59th. And we've only been doing this for a year. That is commitment to Scotland. Thank you, Alex. And with that, can I thank, obviously, Maryhill Hub, all the people involved in the Wynford project, and it's been a hugely interesting and important meeting. And can I thank Independence Live and all of you who are watching us online. We'll see you all again at the 60th meeting in a couple of weeks' time.
And ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to give recognition to our wonderful chair, Tasmina Ahmed-Sheikh.